Okay, this is the last meeting of the month. And last week, I I think I did something unconventional for this group. Um, I had waited uh, to pick a speaker because my process was thinking about who can I ask that might be willing to speak, that probably would be exciting and interesting to the group. And usually that involves trying to find a fresh blood. Not fresh meat, but fresh blood. Okay, and so at the end of the meeting, I said, if there's anybody that would like to speak, see me after the meeting. So I'm standing around talking to Rick and everything, and Chris comes up to me and he says, "Are you still looking for someone?" I said, "Yeah, sure." And so I introduced myself, and I gave him my phone number, and so I said to Chris, I said, "Hey, where are you from?" And he goes, "New Hartford." Does anybody know where that is?
Yeah.
It's like you can't get there from here. You know? It's a faraway place. So, hour and a half drive. And so I started thinking to myself about commitment, And I was a little bit worried because, it's a long way away, but I gave him my phone number, and he said he'd call me if he couldn't make it. And come to find out, he's sponsoring Mike over here, and all kinds of good things were happening, and it sort of came together today. So it's with great pleasure that I introduce Chris.
Hello, my name is Chris. I'm an alcoholic.
Hey, Chris.
I'm grateful to be here. One of the things I was taught early on in these groups and by my sponsor was, if you say yes to a commitment, make sure you're there, unless something tragic happens, Also, when you're asked, which I wasn't, but when you're asked to do a commitment, do it. My sobriety date is May 26, 2008. And I mean, not back then, but there was a lot more being voluntold. There was a lot more of I just feel like it was a different energy pre-pandemic in a sense. If it wasn't for the commitments that I was doing, the before and after meeting connections, I don't know if I could have stayed sober. So I give a lot of people credit, especially that got sober through the pandemic time. I don't know how people did it virtually without the before and after. But yeah, so that's my spiel on that. So I was born in Connecticut. When I was 1, I moved to California. My father was an active alcoholic. My mother was the perfect codependent. In that situation, I have a sister that's 7 years older than me. My mom wanted to get away from him as soon as possible because of the abuse. So we took off and got as far away as possible. Went to California. My mom met a guy. We moved out there. My sister came with me. There was abuse going on, so my sister got taken away by the state of California. For whatever reason, they kept me in the house. So where I grew up was Salinas, California. And you know how people talk about being an alcoholic and kind of feeling like you don't fit in, wherever you are. Well, the school I went to was 90% Hispanic. So I really felt like I didn't fit in, and I didn't fit in. So even at an early age, I don't know if it was alcoholism or not. I try not to figure out what's alcoholism, which is from dysfunctional family, which it's just I am the way I am. But I I forgot where I was going there. I don't know, at a young age, I didn't feel like I fit in. I learned how to survive in situations. I knew how to become a chameleon to fit in. I knew how to make jokes, be funny, so people couldn't see that insecurity inside, that fear inside. And it worked very well, like very, very well for a long time. My mom's boyfriend was very abusive, mentally, physically, emotionally. They were active in substances, in drinking, but it was one of those houses where they didn't want any of that information being leaked out. It was, closed doors. What happens in here stays in here. My sister would come out and visit me once in a while, and the house would be like perfect. Everything would look perfect. My room would be so spotless that she knew something wasn't right. No kid's room is that nice and clean. I mean, my stepfather was a ex-military, so it was literally the fold the bed the way you had to in the military. The whole white glove. It was crazy. So a lot of that added on to already having dysfunctional family, not knowing my father, not really seeing my sister, didn't know anything about my family out in Connecticut, going to a school that was I felt like that, kind of like the outcast. That was all feeding towards this, I think, already restlessness deep within. So when I was about, I think it was 9 years old, my stepfather's father moved in with us, and he was the most amazing person. Nothing like his son. He was the first person that I ever experienced caring about me and loving me. My mom I never heard from my mom, "I love you." I never heard anything, never got hugs, any of that stuff. And he was brought into my life for a reason. So he had moved in. I remember getting sick. I got sick. I got put in the hospital. When I was in the hospital, they weren't sure I was going to make it. I was bleeding internally. I had this thing. And I remember a priest would come in. And I didn't realize they do that when things aren't going well. And he would come in and he would talk to me. And I remember my stepfather coming in and kicking the priest out and saying, "Get out of here. We don't want you." I got raised in a very atheist household. So that was my first experience with any form of religion, I guess, or spirituality, was this guy being kicked out. And then I was told, no adult should be around a child like that. They always have ulterior motives. So I ended up getting better from that. We ended up moving. Things were getting really bad in that city, so we moved to Missouri, out of all places, which was not California at all. We moved to Sedalia, Missouri, where the state fair was. And I moved there, and now it was a whole bunch of new people. A whole new area where I had to try to fit in with new people, play that chameleon again. That's when my substance use started. I am an alcoholic, definitely addiction to. So I remember first I started stealing pot from my mom and them, and I would trade it for these BMX bicycle parts. And I did think back now, that person got some really good deals. But I remember doing that, trying it out. It didn't really do anything for me. Then stealing beer. I remember my first beer was Red Dog. I remember that. And I stole it and left it outside, and it got warm. And it was never a social thing. I remember going out there and slamming the whole thing. Looking at beer was it's gonna do something for me, and I'm gonna drink it, and I'm gonna feel an effect. Well, I didn't feel an effect off of that one beer. I remember stealing rum balls. That was another thing, and I tried that and didn't get drunk. I ended up moving to Columbia, Missouri shortly after that. My stepfather's dad had gotten sick with cancer and wasn't doing well. So I moved up to Columbia, and that was the first time I ever got drunk. I remember I was going to a school. It was like a fairly big city. And I went over to this girl's house, me and a couple friends, and we stole a vodka from her dad. And everyone's trying to drink it, and they probably reacted like normal people, like, this is awful. I'm not drinking this. And I said, get it to me. So I didn't know it looked like water. So we filled a glass with a lot, and I remember slamming it back. And at that point, I was like, I've been through so much in life. This can't be that bad. It's just alcohol. And all I really remember was, that inner dialogue that I had of being worried about what I'm going to say in front of people, worrying about future, maybe abuse, worrying about the past abuse I went through. It went away. It was gone. Like, I felt like I could just be. I was drunk. I could say whatever I wanted. There was no filter, which it's good to have a sense of a filter, definitely. But there was no filter. I just felt free. I remember getting on my bike and trying to ride my bike home. My sister was visiting at the time. I ended up getting really sick. She helped me get in bed, all that stuff. And I remember going to school. That was on a Friday, going to school on Monday. And all my friends were like, whoa, dude, you were so drunk. And I was like, cool, I'm popular now. Like, this is awesome. And I kept that in my memory bank of what that did to me. I wasn't conscious of doing that, but it did something. It sparked something in me that this stuff is amazing. It's working. It does stuff that I can't, it does stuff that I can't do for myself. And it was a sense of a spiritual experience. I mean, what they call, it's spirits, they say, alcohol spirits. So spirit, for me, it was a spiritual experience, So shortly after that, I think I was about 14, turning 15, and the abuse was getting so bad that my grandfather, my stepfather's father, before he passed, got a hold of my family out in Connecticut, said, you need to figure out a way to come and get him. He needs to get out of here. And that was one of his last wishes, was getting me to be with my family. So my dad ended up coming. I don't know how they figured it out, but he ended up coming and picking me up in Missouri. And I don't even know this guy. And he comes and picks me up with my uncle. And I get in the car with him. All I knew about him was that he was abusive to my mother, but he had been sober. He got sober in 1985. So he ended up picking me up. I remember driving to Connecticut, and I'm this young kid, and he caught me smoking a cigarette. So he bought me a carton. I don't know why he did, but he did to kind of connect with me. And I was like, this is awesome, like best dad in the world. I ended up moving to Winsted, Connecticut. First, it was Tolland, Mass, which was the smallest place I've ever seen in my life. I had never seen snow. I think I saw a dusting in Missouri once. I moved here. It was 1995. I lived in Tolland for a short period of time. Then I ended up moving to Winsted and moved in with my sisters and their boyfriends. And that's when things started really going bad for me. Well, at the time, it felt good for me. They were partiers. They were of age to buy alcohol. I met all my family. All my family were into drinking and other substances. And I felt like, I don't know, I felt like I fit in. I felt like I wasn't being judged. I started smoking a lot, drinking constantly. It was never social drinking. It was keg stands and all that type of stuff, parties in the woods. And I ended up dropping out of high school. I was a 3-year freshman, and it wasn't that I wasn't smart. The teachers are like, you're so smart, why don't you apply? Why don't you, put your energy into school? I'm like, no, it's so much fun outside of school. I would skip school and all that stuff. So I ended up dropping out. I ended up getting my GED when I was 18, right away. I ended up going to my first treatment center. I So I went to my first treatment center at 17, actually. Went to this place called Cornerstone at Eagle Hill down in Danbury area. They're not open anymore. Remember going there, no desire to stop drinking or partying. I went in there and I didn't even play the game there. I was like, I'm just too young. I'm not going to stop. Like, this is stupid, So I stayed there for a short period of time. They actually discharged me because they're like, oh, he's not too bad. He's a young kid. And I was lying, saying I just smoked pot on the weekends. So they let me go, immediately got home, smoked, and I was living with my mother. She had left her boyfriend and moved to Connecticut. She smoked a lot of pot, so I stole some from her, and then I was off and running again. One of the things I found out about wherever I move, I end up connecting with people similar to me. I'd connect with people that, come from like divorced families, not on purpose, but divorced families or dysfunction, because I feel okay in those situations. If I went into someone's house where both parents were still together and they were eating dinner at 5 as a family, that freaked me out. I just did not like that. Probably because it would bring up my inadequacies maybe or shame or something. So I ended up going to that treatment, getting out, continuing the partying. When I was 18, I got into some other substances, got into a lot of other trouble, not arrested for anything, but close. And I ended up putting myself in another treatment center, and I went to Stonehaven in Portland. I don't think it's a rehab anymore. But I went there, and I didn't like it. There was a priest that was part of the place there, and that immediately turned me off. And then I ended up going to a meeting. I think it was an NA meeting at the time. It was called Pigs in Space, and that meeting freaked me out, man. Like, there's just so many people all happy and being loud, and I was like, this is weird. And I was like, I have to become religious if I join this, and I'm not going to be a choir boy. I don't want to be all that stuff, and life will be over, and I'll just have to be like this straight edge, like, do nothing. So I ended up leaving that rehab and going back to the same place I was living, behind the police station, actually, and we didn't say like directly behind. And this is a huge thing I'd like to share about how my mind works, trying to stay sober without anything to replace that, replace the alcohol. So I ended up going into my apartment by myself. I remember being like, I'm just going to stay sober myself. I don't need nothing. So I'm sitting in this apartment all by myself, looking around. And all of a sudden, I started getting that loneliness feeling. And I was like, I'm going to call a friend that lives up the road, and I'm just going to let him know I'm out of rehab and I'm sober now. I think it was like 3 weeks, but it was like huge for me. I'm going to call them. Maybe they're worried about me. And that's my disease starting to convince me to slowly step towards a relapse, I guess you would call it. So I call this guy, and he's like, hey, I'm having a huge party at my house. I'm like, oh, good for you. I'm not coming down. I'm sober, And I get off the phone, and I'm sitting there. And I'm like, you know what? I'll walk down there, and I'll say hi. Maybe I'll meet a nice girl there, and then we'll come back to my place and we'll hang out, and I won't be alone, So there I'm already walking towards a relapse. But I got out of treatment, and I wasn't going to drink. Like, I was 100, like, I'm done. So I'm going to this person's house. I go in, I'm talking to everyone. I'm like, I'm sober, blah, blah, blah. And next thing you know, I don't know what I did. I convinced myself I could smoke weed. So I smoked a little weed, and then next thing you know, I was like, I could have one drink, and I started drinking, and I remember I got loaded. So drunk that night, and that led to another long relapse. I wouldn't even call it a relapse. I just drank again. That's what I can do to try to stay sober, left to my own devices. That's as good as I can do without some type of support, some type of whatever power greater than myself higher power. Without all that stuff, that's how I'm going to do staying sober. Loneliness is a very dangerous place for an alcoholic. And not having like any hope and not feeling like I had any meaning and purpose when I had gotten out of that treatment center, I was going to find something to remove that. So I continued partying for a while. Then I got my house raided by the statewide narcotics task force. They offered me jail or rehab. Basically, I had to go to this thing, and I had to convince them that I was an alcoholic and an addict, and they would put me in rehab instead of jail. And I didn't know if I was an alcoholic, but I knew that if I said I was an alcoholic, I'd go to rehab instead of jail. So I think that was the first time I ever said I was an alcoholic, but I didn't know if I was. I'm just not stupid. And I knew 45 days was better in rehab than jail. So I remember I went to Connecticut Valley Hospital. I always went to the high-end, rehabs. So I went to Merritt Hall. I remember going in. It was December 11th, 2001. So it was like exactly 2 months after 9/11. I remember going there without a desire to stop drinking. I woke up the next morning there, and for some reason, the obsession had just left me. I have no idea how. It left me. There was kind of one of those, like, if I drank a drug, that's all I'm going to do my whole life. If I don't, I could do everything else. So I stayed there for the 45 days, got out, and stayed sober for almost 4 years. I got really big into young people's AA. I was sponsoring a whole bunch of guys. I was big book thumper. Like, if it's not in the book, it's BS to a fault, But I had found something that was working, and I wanted to hold on to it and protect it as much as possible. So I had gotten a job at a treatment center. I was working at Mountainside for a bit. After a while, I think it was at 3 years, I started getting really bad anxiety and panic attacks. I was still going to meetings. I was still sponsoring guys. I was praying in the morning and at night. But I was waking up every morning, and I was having anxiety. And then panic attacks would come. And it happened every day. And I would pray, God, please remove me of this. God, please remove me of this. I would talk to people. And some of the people in my big book group, be like, well, you might have left something out in your 4-step, blah, blah, blah. And I couldn't think of anything that I did. So I would do another one and still having the panic attacks. And it got to a point where I was like, if this is the way I'm going to feel, I'm just going to use. And I ended up taking Xanax at first, which worked great to the point where if I took more, it worked even better. And then with the substance even like that, and Bill and Dr. Bob too, even he had a big pill problem too. I think there was one of the things where he would drink, but when he would work, he would take those type of medications so he can work, then he would drink again. So I ended up going through a 2-year relapse. It was horrific. Only alcoholics and addicts, I think, would understand this. But no matter what I put in my system, I couldn't get there. And I guess you guys probably all understand what there is. There's that place of, okay, I'm drunk enough or I'm whatever enough. I've talked to, my wife isn't an alcoholic at all, and she doesn't understand what there is, like, where are you trying to get? I'm like, here, maybe here, like right now to be okay. So 2 years of that, ended up getting arrested again, which has always been a great motivator for getting sober. Got arrested, went to treatment, went to Alliance Treatment Center when it was in New Britain before it had closed. Went there, got out, went to a sober house. Didn't stay sober. Then all of a sudden, I ended up going to, I manipulated my mother into letting me stay with her. And she let me stay there, and she had certain contingencies. And I went back to the young people's groups, and I raised my hand and said, hey, I don't know how to stay sober. I can recite the steps, the promises, all that stuff. I understand all that, but I can't stay sober. I just don't know. And one of the guys ran up to me at the break. He's like, I'm going to sponsor you. I'm like, okay. And he's like, we're going to start reading the book. We're not going in for the second half of the meeting. I'm like, all right, whatever. And we did that. And then another guy said, I want you to call me tomorrow morning. Another guy said, I want you to call me at lunch. Another guy said, I'm picking you up for a meeting at night. And that was my start back into AA. I needed that. I remember I went years with still having an obsession to drink. It wasn't there constantly, but there was a tough time trusting myself or feeling comfortable. Because once I would start feeling comfortable, this voice in my head would be like, oh, you've been there before and you screwed it up. So I got into therapy. I was doing a lot of service work, but what I had to find, and it's one of our sayings in AA, and it's on one of the coins, to thine own self be true. I had to find spirituality that felt right inside. First time I was doing a lot of act as if, fake it till you make it, and it was working. But this time I couldn't do that. I really had to I couldn't just believe things just because other people said it. I really needed to find my path. So I was going to meetings constantly, working like crazy, got into another program called Adult Children of Alcoholics. That was very important for emotional sobriety. I actually got into a lot of meditation. I started going to a Zen Buddhist temple. I think it was at like 1 year sober. Got really into that. Did a course on that. And I found, a lot of a power greater than myself in a lot of the meditation and mindfulness. So that's been my higher power. One of the big things, if I'm really being mindful, really paying attention and being conscious of things, the thought of to pick up a drink would be complete delusion and insanity. Like completely insane. For me to pick up a drink today would be the craziest thing I could ever do. Like, lock me up. My brain is broken. So I continued doing that. I worked some jobs, that I really didn't like. I just kept doing it. Everyone said, you should go back to school and you should work in this and that. And I was like, oh, I don't want to. But then I got to a point where I was like, I need to create some type of meaning and purpose. And I'm huge on having meaning and purpose and always having something to look forward to. Those are two things I think are so important, whether you're an alcoholic or not. I've noted I'm very observant, and part of that might be being raised in abuse. I'm paying attention to things, but I've noticed that even people when they get older and they retire, say even, if they don't have meaning and purpose and something to look forward to, slowly deteriorate. My father, he has Parkinson's. He's been sober for a long time, completely miserable. All he does is sit and watch the news 24/7, which is even worse. And I could watch him. He has no meaning and purpose and nothing to look forward to. And same thing with, say, people are married and they lose their significant other, losing their meaning and purpose. So I try to keep something. And one of those things is using my pain as a superpower, I guess you would call it. I don't know what you call it, but to help other people. With the anxiety, I try to help other people with that because I can relate. We can help people that read out of a book could never help. I think just talking to someone that's went through a similar pain as you cuts that pain rate in half. Say you have cancer, someone else has cancer, they're going through treatment, you talk to them, I think that pain could be cut in half. Now, if you're talking to someone else that hasn't, you don't get that same magic. So I ended up getting into working in treatment. I do in-home addiction treatment, so I drive to clients' houses and meet with them for an hour. So it's like, imagine a sponsor, but like also a counselor. I fall in the middle of that. I don't do step work or any AA stuff with them, but I fall in the middle. And that's been really helpful for me. That's not my recovery, but it does keep things green for me. I decided to get into, go back to school, which was just insane, but I'm doing it. I'm working towards becoming a social worker, which was something I never could ever imagine doing. So I'm going to school for that now. I love where I work. I work with amazing people. I'll end with this part. So about 9 months ago or 8 months ago, my sister, she ended up getting put on methadone for a long time, and then she started drinking again, and which is a horrible combination. She ended up really bad off, and she ended up in the hospital to detox. And I remember going there to see her right when she went in, and I couldn't even recognize her. And she was someone I had always looked up to, and I had to look at her wristband just to see if it was even her. I was scared that I lost her. I thought she had just, because she had the ammonia in the liver where it can go to the brain and like wet brain type thing. And for days and days, like I would try to talk to her, and there was just nothing there. And she ended up going to a group home or whatever. She ended up getting better, but still needed a new liver, all this. So she went home, and she kind of had this new lease on life, even though she needed to do all that. She wanted to stay sober. She was making all these doctor's appointments. And in June, at 1:30 in the morning, she had a heart attack and was without oxygen for like 20 minutes. And she was basically like a vegetable for 8 days in the hospital. And my whole family was devastated. I was devastated, but because I'm sober, my family was leaning on me through the whole thing. And I had to make a lot of the decisions of like pulling the plug, when to do that, organ donor. I was there every single day. She has a daughter that's 16. I was there for her daughter. And just seeing what alcohol could do to you. This was 2.5 years of her drinking heavy. So it wasn't like she hadn't drank for a long time. And just destroying her body and then her daughter. So the people that it hurts around you. So that didn't happen long ago. And I just got married 2 months ago today. And that is something I never thought would ever happen, ever. And I was going to just become a Buddhist monk if I ended up single forever. It was a joke. It was my plan. But she wasn't there, and that was really painful, too, to not see her there. So overall, I'll wrap up with this. Overall, life can be shitty sometimes. Shitty stuff happens. Great stuff happens. Both happen. And I have to be okay with both of those things. And when they're happening, I could feel like shit. If someone pisses me off, I can be upset. But what am I going to do with that? For a long time, I would judge myself for feeling certain ways. I get resentful towards someone. Well, that's how I'm feeling. It's going to take me a process to get through things today. Not judge myself. I shouldn't feel like this, because that's dangerous for me too. I'm human. I'm doing the best that I can do. And some days are better than others. If I don't pick up a drink, if I don't, if I do that, all bets are off. So, I'm grateful to be here. Yes, it's an hour drive, and it's through Hartford, which I hate driving through all the time, but I drive like 6 times a week through Hartford for clients. But I love coming to this meeting. So if you guys could move it closer to the other side of the river, I would be cool with that. But yeah, so thank you guys so much for having me here.
Thank you, Chris.